what is the lessons from Indonesia's democratic transition on Arab Spring countries? I have to say that I'm not an expert on what is going on in Egypt, in Tunisia, and in Libya, and in other places. But I can say that when I see and read the news about what's going on in these countries, a lot of them I see, hey, this looks familiar, we went through this road before and so on. So I think we have a couple of things that might be useful. One is that it is very important to have a committed transition figure, right? When President Suharto stepped down, we had his vice president came up, and he had about a year and a half before he would do the first elections. He was unelected. He had no constitutional or electoral, he had little electoral mandate because he did not win the elections. He was just overseeing the transition. And a lot of us were skeptical. What could this guy do with that electoral mandate? And you know what? He became, people say, the strongest proponent of democracy. He just broke down every wall. He lived as if there was no tomorrow. He scrapped all the oppressive laws. And I think if 1999 elections were successful, he had a big part of it. And you know what else? He did not run for elections. So he said, I would manage the transition, and I'm not running for elections at the end of the road. And that consolidated his seal as one of the most important figures in Indonesia's history in terms of promoting reforms. It's also important in that context for the reform process to co-opt and transform the previous power structures. In our case, the old political party, Golkar, that ruled Indonesia for so many decades, we asked them, look, are you in for reform or not? And when they said yes, even though some people doubted it, they said, come on in and transform yourself. They had to prove and earn their spot in the new democratic setup. And this is exactly what happened. And most important is get the military on board. Right? I mean, this is one of the most important lessons in Myanmar, in Egypt, and in other transition democracies, getting the military on board. And this helped tremendously our democratic transition process. Next, Arab Spring countries will have to understand that things will get worse before it gets better. You will always have voices that will say, hey, you know what, we miss the old days. Let's go back to the old days. But you know what? Ignore these voices. Make sure that you are on the right side of history and push back. Next, it's very important to realize that in the beginning there will be lots of euphoria and little governance. And this is the problem that you need to fix. A lot of euphoria, people, because the press is open and so on, everybody would be speaking up and so on and so on, but no one would be running the government, or if somebody was, somebody without experience because they're totally new, and you need to achieve that balance soonest. Reduce the euphoria and increase governance. It took us about 3 or 4 years to reach that level, right? And in those 3 or 4 years, it wasn't pleasant. Next lesson is seek, embrace, and welcome change. When you're a country run by authoritarian government for 3 decades or 4 decades, your first instinct is what? To always be suspicious of change. And the more you seek, embrace, and welcome change, as opposed to resisting it, the more you will advance reforms, and the more your democratic transition will be in a better place. Next, expect these countries to be inward-looking, right? Indonesia, after 1998, we became very inward-looking, and we had no time for foreign policy, because the house was on fire, right? When the house is on fire, you take care of the house, right? It was about 2 or 3 years we were in that state. Even though we were the largest country in Southeast Asia, we stayed on our domestic agenda. And a lot of our foreign policy moves was just to secure resources and to secure our democratic development. I expect the same thing more or less in the Arab Spring countries, that they're going to be inward looking for some time and manage their house in order. And then at some point, once they get established, then their foreign policy will adjust accordingly. Next advice I would give them is, look, it's good to make mistakes, right? I know when we had our democratic transitions, There are a lot of voices internationally who say, don't do this, you make mistakes, you don't do this, do this. And you know what? The best lesson that we had that really made us the strong democracy that we had today is the mistakes that we made in the early years, right? Those mistakes were more powerful and more imprinted in our national psyche than 1,000 advices from smart international visitors. The last two lessons, first is get the first elections right? What happened for us was in 1999, we didn't get the first elections right because the woman who won the most votes, Megawati, did not become president. Do some tricky electoral laws where the president has to be elected by parliamentarians. The person who secured small votes became president, as opposed to the woman who secured the largest amount of votes. I think she won over 30%, right? Despite all the certainties of where we should go and the battles between the politicians and the political parties, in the end we just said, look, let's just leave it to the people. Let the elections decide the outcome. And we were fortunate because in most cases, not all cases, in most cases, the people always made the right decision. I question this notion that uneducated people cannot make the right decisions. There's this notion, right? In the past, look, don't give democracy to people because they don't have degrees. Some of them may be illiterate and so on. Don't give them democracy. They're not ready. They can't make the right judgment. But you know what? I find that in Indonesia, the people, regardless of their educational background, generally make good decisions, decisions that are based on their conscience. So that has helped our democratic development quite a bit.